red is on. Should we all turn them on, or the mics? Does it matter?
Yeah, nobody gave you instructions on that. Yeah, if it's
Red is
Can
Red
you
is
hear
on,
me?
so I assume we should all turn them on, I guess. I don't know.
is it on? It's on. Yeah, I mean, if it's on,
No, turn it.
press the button.
there you go. Okay, if the red light's on, it's on, I guess. Testing, are we on?
Feels like Jeopardy.
That's right.
Mark, you need to put your,
How's that?
Here.
Now, red means on. Red is on. Hello. Okay, thank you. Perfect, thanks.
Bad panning, yeah. All good, thank you.
and now I'm just waiting for a signal. What campaign?
It's
sign?
oh, you can pull it away.
There are no campaign signs allowed
You
inside.
can pull it away. I'll take it if you want.
It goes outside.
It's a good thing I covered up my neck tattoo.
I'll just put it here.
And I'm waiting for word from our master person, Jen.
You coming Sunday? Should I start first with the Sunday thing? Yeah. Okay. At one point, we can see.
Nice to see Mary Ann. Haven't seen her in a while. So usually someone comes to tell us that they're all set to go. I forgot to ask her if she was going to give me a signal. That's usually what happens. Oh, yes.
You guys on to more than Wednesdays?
Excuse me?
Are you guys meeting more than just Wednesdays
Signal?
yet? In the General Assembly? Is it just Wednesdays or?
We're not meeting
Hello and welcome to a League of Women Voters Greater Hartford and West Hartford Community Television candidate debate. I am Carol Mulready, Chairperson of Voter Service for the League of Women Voters of Greater Hartford, and will serve as the moderator for this debate, which is the special election for the 5th Senatorial District of Connecticut. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages informed and active participation by citizens in government. We are pleased to bring you this debate in cooperation with West Hartford Community Television and with the assistance of our volunteer timers and question screeners. The audience is encouraged to submit written questions to the screeners who will help the moderator prepare the questions that are appropriate for this office and to make sure we have no duplications. The debate will be conducted in a modified cumulative time format. It is designed to enable candidates to freely elaborate approaches to a variety of issues unimpeded by strict time constraints in more traditional debate formats. Each candidate will have 12 minutes of discussion time during the debate. When speaking, each candidate is timed by a League of Women Voters timekeeper, periodically keeping the timekeepers the timekeepers will keep the candidates informed of how much time they have left. Candidates are encouraged to rebut and surrebut, responding to their policy and philosophical differences as they perceive them, understanding that the clock is running. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. The order of precedence for speaking has been determined by lottery, as has the closing statement. It is now my pleasure to introduce the candidates who have committed their time and energies to this important aspect of the democratic process, running for elective office. I am going to present them to you in alphabetical order. The first is Mark Stewart Greenstein. He is a businessman, former lawyer, and educator. During law school, he supported himself teaching SAT prep courses, and he felt he could do better for students and founded a tutoring firm of his own in 2001. His current business is Education Excellence, which gives students more post-grad opportunities through outsourced in-school guidance counseling. Mark is a liberty-oriented Democrat and hopes to be helping the Democrat Party return to tolerance and individualism. Mr. Greenstein would roll back state welfare in favor of private welfare and abolish the ECS system in favor of choice for school children. He would end the income tax, reduce regulations on business and state control over individuals who harm nobody, reassert the death penalty, and assertively hunt cyber criminals. He would end political favoritism by pushing to repeal 3 laws for everyone passed. He takes zero money from donors, and he would like to bring in out-of-state businesses to Connecticut, including international firms, and an NHL team to replace the Whalers. Welcome, Mr. Greenstein.
Thank you.
Geoffrey Rush is a longtime Connecticut resident. He was born and raised in Hartford and still misses the Whalers, our second fan for the Whalers.
We're going to get him back.
He graduated from Northwest Catholic High School, where he currently teaches. He has a degree in English from Boston College. His master's was obtained from Trinity College in Hartford, focusing on writing and rhetoric. Jeff has lived in Farmington since 2006 and has worked as a teacher and coach here in West Hartford for 22 years. In his spare time, Jeff enjoys being a volunteer coach for his daughter's basketball team, writing and playing music, and reading. Most importantly, Jeff is a proud father of 2 children, Julia 13 and Cody 8. Welcome, Mr. Presh.
Thank you.
Derek Slapp is the endorsed Democrat candidate running in this special election. As a state representative currently serving the 19th district, including Avon, Farmington, and West Hartford, Derek has led the charge on pay equity, passing a bill to remove the salary question from job interviews, leveling the playing field for women. In addition, he has worked with Senator Beth Bayh to get an independent consumer advocate for the Metropolitan District Commission. He also fought to keep education funding in the district and to stop taxing Social Security. He will fight for earned family leave so employees can balance work and taking care of a sick child or family member. He also will work for our environment, especially water, our schools, so we receive our fair share of education funding, our seniors, working to have birth dates removed from job applications to end age discrimination. In this legislative session, Derek is working to address the teen vaping crisis. Additionally, he supports early voting. Welcome, Mr. Slapp.
Thank you.
Mr. Wadsworth is a resident of Farmington. His family settled there in around 1645. He is the 11th generation still living there. It goes without saying that his ancestors have participated in public service at the local and state level since the founding of Farmington, and he has continued in that tradition. He has spent his entire life working in the private sector, mostly in construction. For the past 30 years, he has managed many large projects, such as the Hartford Healthcare Building at Blueback Square. He has spent 22 years in public service to the town of Farmington and the state of Connecticut, most as a volunteer. He served on the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Town Planning and Zoning Commission, the Farmington Town Council for 6 terms, and the State of Connecticut House of Representatives for a term. He has also served on numerous committees in land acquisition and building committees. He is also on the Town of Farmington Economic Development Commission. Currently lives in Farmington with his wife Kate, and they have a blended family of 6 children and 6 grandchildren. Welcome, Mr. Wadsworth.
Thank you.
We're going to start this evening with a question from the League of Women Voters. I don't have to tell any of you that there's a little tension between revenue and expenditures in the state right now. If elected, you are going to have to grapple with that. Give us one idea of what you would suggest as a new source or improved source of revenue for the state of Connecticut. And this goes first to Mr. Slapp.
Great. Well, thank you. And first, I want to thank Carol with the League, and I want to thank all the League members who are here, and also the audience, all of you who came out on a cold Friday night to take part in democracy. So thank you. And also, I would say to the other gentlemen here who are with me, running for office is not an easy thing to do, to put yourself out there, and it takes a toll on your family as well. So I commend all of you, too. This is part of a healthy democracy. So to answer your question, about revenue, I mean, one thing we can do, and our past commissioner, Kevin Sullivan with DRS, has done a good job of making sure that, existing taxpayers pay their fair share and we close loopholes. And that's one thing that we could certainly do more of. I will say that the approach that we've had to the budget the last 2 years, and I've only served for 2 years, I think has worked. And let me kind of explain why. We had, for the first time in recent memory, a bipartisan budget. We had both parties come together and make really tough decisions. We had important structural reforms, and we also came together to protect our towns and to protect education funding and to start to make kind of the strategic investments that's actually going to really grow our economy. And I think that that's important to continue that paradigm at the Capitol. I'm committed to reaching across the aisle. I think neither party has a monopoly on good ideas. And I have many examples of how I've done that to help create good public policy. So I think we need to scour every agency for budget cuts, no question. The revenue question, usually, enhance revenue. An example that I gave, that can be part of the mix as well. But it's going to take a lot of hard work, and I think we need to work together across party lines.
Thank you. Mr. Wadsworth?
First of all, I don't think that the revenue is generally the answer in this situation. We've had a budget crisis with the state of Connecticut in recent memory. It goes back till 2011 when I first served as a member of the House of Representatives for the 21st District. At that time, our issue was about a $2 billion shortfall on the $20 billion budget, and that was solved by a revenue increase. Taxes were increased, and one of the largest tax increases in the state of Connecticut. And a little sidebar to that, I was a member of a Republican caucus at that time, and we came up with an alternative budget that did not raise taxes at all and solved the budget crisis through establishment of current services. So, but obviously that budget was not considered because we were in minority back then and didn't get brought forward. Fast forward a couple of years to the 15 budget cycle, same issue, $2 billion short, solved by one of the largest tax increases in the history of the state of Connecticut. In 17, Derek is correct, there was a bipartisan budget put out there because, quite frankly, the Republicans and the Democrats in the Senate were tied, and then a few moderate Democrats came over to help us put this budget together. And in that year, 17, there were no increases or little increases in taxes, but certainly the budget was passed. Here we are again, 2019, the same issue is there, $2 billion or $1.5 billion short, and from what I've seen out there in reading the paper, it looks like that is going to be tried to be solved through increase in taxes. The grocery tax was out there for a while. I don't know if it still is or not, but that was out there. Tax on medication is out there. Tolls, which I believe is a car tax or another tax. It's not necessarily a toll. It's an increase in taxes. And statewide real estate taxes, statewide car taxes. I mean, these are the solutions that I've seen so far, and I haven't heard too much about cutting taxes. So going forward, even to 2021, the $1 billion increases are still there every year. So I think it needs to be solved on a reduction in cost of the size of government and work our problems out that way.
Thank you. Mr. Presh.
Thank you. I'd also like to echo what Derek said before about thanking everybody for being here, and especially to the LWV for allowing me to be here as a third-party candidate. I'm going to address revenue more so than anything else. I would like to say that as far as the fair share goes, the bottom 50% of taxpayers in the state only pay 3% of the income tax. So I think as far as the fair share goes, we're doing fine. In terms of revenue, I am a proponent of legalizing both marijuana and sports betting. As a libertarian, that's part of our core beliefs, that people should be have the right to regulate what goes into their body and also what they are able to do with their money. If they want to throw a bet down on the Jets, well, they're foolish. I'm a Jets fan, I can say that. But they should have the right to do that. Massachusetts, as I'm sure we all know, legalized marijuana usage last year for recreational purposes. On the first day marijuana was legalized in Massachusetts, they raised $440,000, of which $74,800 was revenue for Massachusetts. That's one day. That's one day. To not do that, to me, is silly, and especially since there's so many Connecticut residents that are shooting up to Northampton up 91 to spend tax dollars there that could be spent here. In addition, in terms of legalizing marijuana, I read an article in Science Magazine that says the use of prescription opioids has decreased in states that have legalized marijuana. So with the opioid crisis we're facing in this country, I think that's also a no-brainer. As far as legalized sports gambling go, I think we need to look no further than New Jersey. New Jersey sports books are currently bringing in $100 million a month, and that's not in football season. During football season, they bring in $184 million a month. So no matter how you choose to tax or regulate that, as far as I'm concerned, that's easy money for Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Presh. Mr. Stewart Greenstein.
Well, I'm still a Democrat, and I'm one of the few Democrats who doesn't believe we need to bring in more revenue. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem. And spending smartly is within our capabilities. But government doesn't tend to really want it. Derek, you said we should scour for budget cuts. We've been saying this for 40 years. It's easy to find places. Go to almost any department. I go to Yukon Health. People are lazing around. You go to DMV. You go to almost any agency. If you really want to, you can get people working more assiduously. I'm generally against government doing things because they don't do things as well as you and I, who run businesses and have to work more assiduously. Ned Lamont has to present a budget, I think next week. This would be mine. It says to cut the easiest 20%. Leave it to the governor to decide what he thinks is easy to do that would get funded privately. And that's an awful lot of stuff that you and I want. We want it so much that we're going to fund firefighters anyway, fund good homes for rehabilitating people, fund autistic children. It doesn't have to go through the state. And when it does go through the state, it meets machinations like General Assemblymen who don't care as much. They're under the control of lobbyists at times. They are not purely acting on what we the people want. I'd like to see a slimmed down governance so that what's left can be done better.
Thank you, Mr. Greenstein. Our second question is on the proposal from Secretary of State Denise Merrill to change the Connecticut Constitution, which currently says that persons must appear in person on Election Day unless there are six specific reasons that absentee balloting is allowed. So I would like you to discuss with us what your opinion on a constitutional amendment is. A goal for many people is that there be early voting allowed, but there are other things that could happen as well. And this goes to Mr. Wadsworth first.
Thank you very much. As far as voting is concerned, I mean, it's a right that all of us have, and I think that should be protected at all costs. The idea that we have absentee ballots now is one way that people can get out there and vote earlier rather than later. And if it's only 6 reasons why, there's probably more reasons that people use out there to get in earlier. But if it's going to participate more people, solid voters, I would be in favor of it.
Thank you. Mr. Presh.
Okay. I agree with Mr. Wadsworth. Voting is a right that all of us indeed have. But I think it's also important to ensure that the person who is taking advantage of that right is actually the person who's listed on the voter registry. I am in favor of requiring identification for all people. I have no problem with absentee balloting whatsoever. My mother's actually going on a vacation in a couple weeks during the election, so I already have one in the bank, so that's good for me. But other than that, I think the amendment is a solid proposition.
Mr. Stewart Greenstein.
It doesn't rank that high on my agenda, but to a small degree, I'm against the change. I think there's something special in voting in person. Voting day used to be kind of celebratory. It was a good civic thing. I don't like good civics getting watered down with a little element of convenience. If somebody is so inconvenienced because they work a 15-hour day, that could be added to the exemption list. Or somebody who has carpooling to 3 other places. We have out-of-state exemptions. We have military exemptions. I think we can make that. But otherwise, I think keep it intact. Look, if you're voting really early, anyone who voted, they just missed us 9 days before an election. Why not have voting on 1 day or maybe 3 days, but all pretty close? Bill said that he wants to see more people vote. I don't. I want to see more concerned people vote. You who are in this audience, you're concerned enough to be here. People who read about issues, read about candidates, they deserve to be voted, and it's a shame when your vote, Carol, gets canceled out by somebody who just on a whim, some slogan at the last minute, oh, I think I'll vote for the other person. Knowledgeable voting, I think, is precious. You guys are upholding that here.
Thank you. Mr. Slapp.
This is an area, excuse me, I feel very passionate about. I think it's very dangerous when we decide who is knowledgeable enough to vote and who is not. I think that the way right now Connecticut votes is shameful. We disenfranchise folks. If you look at what happened in New Haven recently, where people are waiting hours to vote, it's unacceptable. We can do better. We should not only have early voting, we should have automatic voter registration for, of course, people who are eligible to vote. But there's no reason that we have these extra hoops to make it more difficult for people to vote. And we know that disproportionately, that falls along socioeconomic lines. And oftentimes, folks who live in urban areas really pay the price. And this is one of the many examples where I think we need to be very careful about who we elect and electing somebody who's going to stand up to the Trump administration. Because we see that the federal government has impact on voting rights and on making sure that people are either disenfranchised or enfranchised. I think every vote matters, and we need to do a much better job of ensuring that it's easier to vote in Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Slapp. Mr.
May I
Presh.
interject?
You may.
Yes, New Haven was a mess this year when it came to the gubernatorial election, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that many of those people that were waiting online waited until literally the last minute to register. And I think that's a decision that's more on them than it is on the state of Connecticut. And also, I don't see how dropping Donald Trump's name has anything to do with this issue, personally.
Thank you. Mr. Greenstein.
It's mainly a question. How, besides those dopey voting ballots in New Haven, have people been disenfranchised there?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Nobody
Mr.
should
Slapp.
have to wait hours and hours in line to vote. And there are some folks who are fortunate to have one job, let's say, and work 9 to 5. There are many folks in our communities who are working multiple jobs and balancing many different obligations. And for us to say that you have one window on one day to vote is unacceptable. And if you look at states across the country, both Republicans and Democratic states, they have done a better job than we have. And it's time that we fix this.
Thank you. Next question is one of the questions that came from the audience. The capital fund, known as PEGPETIA, PEGPETIA, has been routinely swept in the budget of Connecticut. This is the fund that supplies capital needs for community television, such as the one we are participating in today, and the technology for schools. What is your position on the use of special funds as legislatively intended, and also the sweep of other funds? And this question goes first to Mr. Prush.
Well, to be completely forthright with you, this is the first I've ever heard the mention of PEGPETIA, so I'm making a note to myself to look into that a little bit. I certainly think for the most part that certain funds should be spent the way that they were intended to do. I think most notably right now is the Transportation Fund. But, in times of emergency, I know that we have the Rainy Day Fund in Connecticut that gets a lot of debate, and how we shouldn't raid the Rainy Day Fund. If there's a rainier time than right now, I can't think of it. But for the most part, I would agree that things that are appropriated for certain projects should be kept to that.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart Greenstein.
It's happened routinely. It's more than just transport. It's mental health. It's been Medicare at times. It's an example of what I've said before. Our government doesn't work. We have people that are entrusted in the General Assembly, and they can't systemically keep their paws off of funds that are earmarked for certain things. That is not good democracy. I would like to see whatever is devoted to stay devoted. It exemplifies how the workings of the General Assembly, and I'm not saying any individual assembly person, but the system is not like anything you do in your household. You in your homes read bills well. Before acting on them, you look at contracts, at least deep ones. The General Assembly has passed things at times without reading, without knowing consequences. You wouldn't pay 11 times market value for anything in your home. General Assembly did last year, or they were about to, until John Lender pointed out that 11 times for a rail station is out of line. I'd like to see homemakers' practices and business people's practices and community activist practices. These are more wholesome. These are done better than the system that we call legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Slapp.
We should absolutely protect these local treasures, and by that I mean public access television, which is one of the beneficiaries of this fund. I've had a show for the past several years, and I see firsthand the value that it has of connecting elected officials, or really anybody who wants to come and create a show and connect with communities. I hear some frustration from residents about that. I also hear, just speaking of communication issues, and it comes to small media and grassroots communication as opposed to corporate communication, frustration with what's happened on net neutrality. And it's another way that the Trump administration is really threatening our quality of life. The overturning of net neutrality is something that I've been fighting at the legislature, and I think it's something very important because small businesses and consumers are going to get fleeced if net neutrality is not restored. So I think there's a whole host of issues we need to look at, and certainly net neutrality is top on my list.
Thank you. Mr. Wadsworth.
The practice of sweeping funds is nothing new to the General Assembly, and certainly the Transportation Fund comes to mind as probably one of the strongest. We in Connecticut pay some of the highest gas taxes in the nation. In fact, our diesel prices are the highest in the nation. They're supposed to go to the Special Transportation Fund, and that fund is supposed to be used for the upkeep of our roads and bridges. To date, that hasn't met the obligations that we need. It's been a crisis for quite some time, and yet the funds keeps getting swept out. This is an item of fiscal discipline, and it got so bad that we had to have a constitutional amendment to protect the transportation fund if funds got into it. So the idea of sweeping is something that should not be practiced in the General Assembly. Certain funds are allotted to certain things, and they should be maintained.
Thank you. Another question from our audience. Do you feel we should go after Amazon in another attempt to be their second headquarters? And this
Is
goes
this one for me?
goes to Mr. Stewart Greenstein.
This is what I proposed 20 months ago to Amazon. Office of Economic Development on behalf of, I call it Elaine, Entrepreneurs Landing Amazon in New England. You're welcome to see it yourself. Anyone can look. I resubmitted it today. Okay? Unchanged, not with any state backing. I'm not yet in the state government. But on behalf of a few entrepreneurs who want to see Northern Connecticut, and that meant Hartford, Springfield, be in play, we had the idea of siting it at Bradley and having a lot of benefits to a company that, if they came here, would reinvigorate the state. As opposed to New York or Chicago or Washington, D.C., those robust economies, Amazon is a significant help, but not huge. We could use huge help. And so, look, Amazon still may be beyond Connecticut's reach, but we should, and I wrote to Catherine Smith, the DECD director, we should be going after divisions of other companies to land them here. I actually started, again, privately on my own. Look it up. It's called Connecticut Commerce, concom.net. And it's meant to be a place, Connecticut, for international firms that could use divisions here. And especially with Trump's trade antipathy, it could be very good for a German firm to site a bunch of employees here, hire Connecticut people to do worldwide business. So whether elected or not, I'm in the corner of Connecticut. Hopefully this proposal gets a little further than just this table.
Thank you. Mr. Slapp.
Sure, absolutely, we should go after Amazon, but it's not really just about Amazon. It's about strengthening our economy. And one of the reasons that I first ran for office was because my wife and I live just a few blocks from here, and we have 3 children. They're young right now, but we don't want to have to fly to California or Dallas or some other place to visit our grandkids in 15 years. We want growth and we want job opportunity here. So we need to do, I think, 3 things. We need to have a balanced, affordable, sustainable budget, and we need to make smart investments in transportation and higher education, public education. And if we do those things, we are a small, smart state. We are located in a very strategic place. We can get this economy moving again, and we need growth, and I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get to it.
Thank you. Mr. Wadsworth.
A lot of the things I've heard over the years is that business feel like they're being taxed too much. I mean, they want to make an investment here. The state of Connecticut's been impeding that progress that they make due to the high taxes, the high cost of energy, things of that sort. Part of the solution, which I don't think really is a solution, is the grants to companies to stay in the state or come to the state. We should be helping out all businesses so that they can provide employment for our residents so they can have a higher quality of life. Certainly we should go after Amazon, but I don't think we should have to sell the company store to get them here. We should be able to offer things to get them here, but also offer those same things to our existing businesses so they're not hurt too much by taxes.
Thank you. Mr. Presh.
Only if they build it in the 5th district. No, seriously though. New York made a big mistake. They lost a big opportunity as far as I'm concerned. And I think it was a case of putting politics before people, which I'm a proponent of the opposite. Yes, I would love to see Connecticut go after Amazon, but again, not give away an arm and a leg in order to get them there. The amount of revenue that this place could potentially bring in, 25,000 jobs that were supposed to be in Queens, New York. How can we say no to that, really? I do think that we need to be intelligent about it and not create an environment where it's, granted, Amazon's far from a small business, but just business in general. We need to be a bit more friendly to businesses in general in terms of how we handle things here in Connecticut. And I think proposing ideas about raising the minimum wage and enacting tolls, that's going to have an adverse effect on what we need to do.
Okay. Mr. Precious final there. Any comments, gentlemen, further comments? Because the league has been interested in this question on the whole concept of incentives to bring business here, to keep businesses here. Those of you who might have read the paper today or yesterday, the GE is paying back Massachusetts $87 million, of incentives that they are not, at least they are paying it back. We have a lot of incentives that are built in for small businesses, some of them for larger. Do you have any further statements that you'd like to make about that? And we'll start again with Mr. Stewart Greenstein, if you'd like.
Sure, I am ambivalent. In normal times, I don't think the state should be making money decisions for private entities. However, we've been in abnormal times. And I actually thought Governor Malloy's first five was a reasonable thing under the circumstances. The circumstances of a state that has gone backwards despite almost every other state going well in the last 15 years. So when you're down, you throw a Hail Mary. Not too many of Governor Malloy's first five worked out, but I wouldn't be afraid if Governor Lamont says, look, I want a lure, I want a carrot here, because the incentive, not only economic, but in spirit. It's one reason I'd like a hockey team back. The spirit of more vibrancy coming here is a good thing for the state's use.
Mr. Slapp.
Yeah, I think these are tools in the economic toolbox that should be used very judiciously. I do want to bring up, though, another topic that's actually related to this, though, and that's the pay equity bill that we got passed just this past year, landmark legislation. And I worked with the Boston Chamber of Commerce on this bill. And, I talked with the Boston Chamber, and they said, we want to make Boston the premier place for working women in the country. And to me, that was so inspiring. And some of the things that we do, it's not just about dollars and cents, but it's about making Connecticut attractive for people who want to come work here. And that's why paid family leave is important. That's why things like minimum wage are important, to have a strong middle class. And that's why ensuring that women and their families don't get lowballed. That's very important. It's important to the quality of life, and it's an issue of fairness. And I'm pleased that we were able to work. I introduced a bill, and it took me 2 years to get it passed. And I brought Democrats and Republicans and labor and business and everybody to the table. And we were one of the first states in the country to pass this landmark legislation. And I do think it's going to make this state more competitive and help our economy.
Thank you. Mr. Wadsworth, do you have anything
Yes.
additional?
Business people make business decisions, and unfortunately, the small businesses in Connecticut can't make the decision to leave. There was an article in the paper a couple days ago about a outfit out of, I think it was Stanford, that got a $41 million grant from the state of Connecticut to come here and stay here. And then as soon as that time ran out, they left for New York, probably chasing another incentive down there. So, big businesses can make those decisions. Their labor costs are far higher than their infrastructure costs, so they can make the decisions to leave, build new facilities somewhere else, and take advantage of incentives from other places. We need to provide low taxes for all businesses. I've talked to a number of small businesses, like I say, that their healthcare costs are through the roof. Four times what they were before the Affordable Care Act came into play. So we need to help those businesses out also.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Brush?
Thank you. I don't think Connecticut is very favorable towards small businesses. It may have been in the past, but I think it's starting to go in a direction where that's no longer the case. I think paid family leave is a wonderful thing. I was very glad that I was able to have it when my 2 kids were born. However, I think it has to be done properly. That's possibly a discussion for another time. I also think that increasing the minimum wage is anathema to small businesses. I remember right after the elections, there was an interview and a podcast with the new Senator Will Haskell from downstate, and I may be paraphrasing here, but he said something to the effect of, if small businesses don't like it, they're not going to do business in Connecticut. That's a horrible, horrible, horrible attitude to have about small businesses. It was a Capital Watch podcast from the Hartford Current, so if you want to go find it, I'm sure you can. Mike Hammond does a great job with that, by the way. As far as minimum wage goes, I think it's unconstitutional on both a federal and a state level. I don't think the government has any right to tell small business owners in the private sector how to run their businesses. And as I said, I think it hurts small businesses more than it helps them. It leads to more unemployment, and therefore hurts everybody in Connecticut simultaneously.
Thank you.
I had a question,
Yes.
mainly for Derek. How is Boston, without government, not a premier place for working women?
I'm happy, by the way, to have a debate between the two of us, but I do want to defer to your format. Would you prefer if you all asked us questions?
It's a rebuttal.
Okay,
You know, as long as you don't have to spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, could you repeat the question?
How, in the absence of government policy that you're emulating, how is Boston not a good place for working women?
Well, I didn't say it wasn't. My point is that the Boston Chamber of Commerce is actively, and this is, a business organization, right? And they're looking at how can we recruit and retain women. And, there's an issue of economic competition, but there's also just an issue of basic fairness. And I think that those two things can exist at the same time. And these are the states, by the way, that we're competing with. So our neighbors to the north have made a value statement that they're going to be a fair place for women in the workplace. And I think that is a policy that is worth aspiring to.
Okay. Mr. Presh or Mr. Wadsworth, do you have anything further?
No comment.
Okay. Next question from our audience. Where do you stand on banning plastic bags? And this goes to you, Mr. Slapp.
Yeah, this is a very important environmental question that we face right now. We have more plastic in our oceans than fish. And this is an issue that I hope that Republicans and Democrats can come together on and reach a bipartisan compromise on. And I think it's actually going to happen this legislative session. And I'm not necessarily saying an outright ban on plastic bags, but I do serve on the Environment Committee right now, and there is some draft kind of compromise legislation right now between the Grocers Association and many environmental groups. And actually, the plastic industry came to the legislature this session, and their first approach was, we're okay with a ban, but let's just negotiate the thickness of the plastic. So, I think the public consensus on this is moving, and I think it is very important that, we take a leadership role on this. We all have a stake in protecting our environment. So I'm very much open to it. Of course, I want to see the details.
Okay, Mr. Wadsworth.
The images are absolutely horrible. What we've seen in the oceans, on the beaches, on land, what we do to our waste is just an incredible disaster. So I certainly would support something that would minimize the additional entrance of these plastics into our environment.
Thank you. Mr. Presh.
Like Mr. Slapp said, I would be amenable to it. I'd have to see the details first.
Mr. Greenstein.
You don't need government to do good things. Many straws are no longer going into the Pacific because people in Washington, Oregon State got aware faster than the legislature. They didn't need to pass things. And I think government should be a backstop, not making it the front, because government tends to not do it very well. Our awareness, our good environmental sensitivities make us preserve things better. I use very few plastic bags, but it's not because some government agency is telling me to now. It's because good awareness makes me a better citizen, that without government, I can contribute better. I think everyone's in that category. You don't need legislation, and the front step, make it a backdrop.
Thank you. The next question, again from the audience. What is your position on the proposed merger of school districts? And this goes to Mr. Wadsworth.
As was stated earlier, I come from the town of Farmington, and we have an excellent education system in Farmington. It's a process that's been developed for decades, where you could start out with something, build on it, come up with blue ribbon schools, come up with excellent high schools, and then have majority of your students go off to a higher learning at a college university level. And a lot of people have invested a lot of time, a lot of energy to make that system the way it is today. The taxpayers in the town of Farmington, probably no different than here in West Hartford, have supported these programs with a certain outcome in mind, and those expectations have always been met. The idea of the government, the state of Connecticut, coming in with a hierarchy of administration people to regionalize many towns into one or one town into another doesn't sit well with me. I can't imagine that they would do it as well as the local governments we have doing it now.
Thank you. Mr. Presh.
I'm all for regionalization of schools, as long as the towns themselves get to decide it. Like Mr. Wadsworth said, I don't think the state government has any place in this whatsoever. If regionalization is going to occur, and it is in some ways already, it needs to be done on a local level. As Carol said earlier, I've been a high school teacher for 22 years, and I've been coaching that same amount of time. And I've seen a lot of school districts consolidate their athletic teams when the need arises. And that's one way to help decrease the financial burden on them. I think the situation goes far deeper than this. I think what we really need is more charter schools, more private sector funded schools in the state to give more opportunity and more choice to parents. I think that we need to allow these schools to innovate, to increase their own efficacy. And also, I think what we're losing a lot here, and a situation such as this would be no different. Education is supposed to be family-based. I mean, we're allowing the state government to make decisions on what's best for our own children. And I don't think anybody knows what's best for our own children other than parents and families themselves. So I think that's what we need to get back to, a more family-based education where families have more say in the content and structure of education as opposed to the state government.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Mr.
Mom.
Greenstein.
Regionalism is dangerous. If I am not elected to this Senate seat, I hope to potentially be on the town council sitting in this very room for one main issue: to resist regionalism, especially in good towns like Farmington and West Hartford, and Harbor's got a good district as well. We don't want to be subject to the state's bureaucracy. We don't want to be subject to Common Core if they buy into it. West Hartford has built up very good schools. A lot of people are here because of the schools. I don't want 5 years from now a regional system, because then you're going to have almost a thuggish, from the top mentality. Nice little school you got here. Be careful. Be shame if anything should happen to it. We can do our schools better. And how do you help the schools that are not doing well? Because especially in West Hartford, we liberals feel for people who don't have such good school systems. Well, that's why I'm for choice in schools, so that Hartford students can come to Windsor, West Hartford, Glastonbury if they want to, armed with, yes, vouchers. It makes a lot of sense. You don't hear that a lot from Democrats. You should. It helps the most impoverished kids, it helps the neediest kids, and it helps kids ideally get better schools where they are, because eventually good schools will spring up in Hartford again if they're left alone from a regionalized system. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Slapp.
I oppose forced regionalization of school districts. I think there are some cases where regionalization makes sense because it can save taxpayer money and help us with property taxes. And that's something that I hear a lot about. People are concerned about property taxes. In West Hartford right now, we have a shared health district with Bloomfield. And by all accounts, it's working out pretty well. So I think there's some smart strategic things that we can do to encourage cooperation across municipalities. But forcing school districts to merge is not something I support.
Thank you. The next question goes to Mr. Presh first. I am a Muslim immigrant and fled my country after being imprisoned for fighting for human rights and democracy. I came here to feel safe and not to be discriminated against because of my beliefs. If elected, what will you do to ensure that I, as an immigrant, feel safe and included?
That's more of a societal problem, I think, than anything else. I believe in the dignity of all people. I believe in what the Constitution says. I believe in what the Declaration of Independence says. I abhor discrimination on any level. I would want to protect not just Muslims, but anybody. There's a whole, what's the word I'm looking for? I apologize. There's a lot of anti-Semitism being tossed around in our national government right now. There's no place for that either. There's no place for discrimination against anybody for any reason. So not to move away from the question as far as Muslim immigrants go, but that's a societal issue, and we need to be, as a people, more sensitive. Thank you, more sensitive and more tolerant, and just more understanding, and just get rid of this, just this pervasive unsensitivity that's going on in society. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart Greenstein.
We should be keeping good immigrants here. When I ran for governor, I said we should be a state that would stand up to deportations. Don't let the INS come for any good citizens. I visited a couple in Farmington whose parents are great. They happened to have crossed here illegally, something that probably almost everyone here would do if they had dire conditions in their home country. And if they've learned English and they're contributing, if they took welfare, they're starting to pay it back, and they have American values, keep them here, stay away from us INS.
Mr. Slapp.
There are some things we could do at the state level. Recently, we've increased penalties for hate crimes. Last year, we just passed a bill to mandate in our schools education about Holocaust and genocide, and that'll pay dividends. So there's some local things, and this is a national issue as well. The vitriol that is coming from the Trump administration when it comes to our immigrants is unacceptable, and I believe that it's incumbent upon all elected officials, doesn't matter what party, to stand up to the Trump administration and say, this is not acceptable. And this is not a time where we can play to our base, right, and try to have it both ways. The Trump administration is one of the most, it is the most divisive that I can ever recall. And I do feel at the state level, at the local level, every level, we need to stand up to this administration when it spews racist vitriol.
Thank you. Mr. Wadsworth.
I just simply state that I'm opposed to discrimination in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you very much.
Ma'am, may I?
Yes, Mr. Presh.
I think assigning the vitriol coming on a national level just to the Trump administration is, while it's true, it's unfair to just assign it to the Trump administration. I mean, if you look at the Democratic Party right now, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez meeting proudly with Jeremy Corbyn from England, who's a blatant anti-Semite. It's on both sides of the aisle. To assign it just to one side is very irresponsible.
Thank you. And the next question will go to Mr. Stewart Greenstein. Do you believe in a strong Connecticut Consumer Protection Agency?
Once again, I think the best consumer protection is free market and free choice. Google protects consumers better than any agency in this state government, because what's on Google is you and him doing reviews, and the choice of going elsewhere when a business is depriving you, not selling well. I think when you respect the free market, good businesses thrive, consumers can find them more easily, and it's very rare that you need the government to step in.
Thank you. Mr. Slapp.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Anything further? No. Okay. Mr. Wadsworth.
One full second. I also agree that we need a consumer protection agency. I mean, the state of Connecticut at certain times can wield a big stick that would help out a number of people in certain situations, and I think we should have that as a tool in our toolbox.
Okay, very good. I'm adding a minute to everybody's time. Okay, the way our time is going, you are going to have one additional minute. So they'll next hold it up when you are getting close to the number that they've got next in line. So I think, everyone's answered that?
I didn't.
Mr. Presh, okay.
I concur. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. the Democrats in Hartford, meaning the capital, not the party, not Hartford, the city, have failed to fully fund the education cost-sharing monies for West Hartford in excess of $100 million. What is your position on school funding? So that's one example of how cost-sharing has gone. What is your general position on school funding? And this goes to Mr. Slapp.
Yeah. One of the things that brought Republicans and Democrats together in the last budget cycle was our commitment to protect education funding. And in West Hartford, the ECS grant is about $20 million. And it's very important to towns, Farmington and Bloomfield and Burlington as well. And I think it's critical that we do protect our ECS funding. And hopefully there'll be a time relatively soon when we can increase it as well. But, every child deserves access to a high-quality education, and that's including pre-K. So I'm committed to doing that. My record shows that. I've been willing to stand up to my own party and governor at one point when I felt that the budget was going to be treating West Hartford unfairly, and I'll continue to do that. It doesn't matter what party. I am going to fight very hard for fair funding for West Hartford and all the towns in the 5th District.
Thank you. Mr. Wadsworth.
The Constitution of the state of Connecticut states that there will be a free primary and secondary education for the residents of the town of Farmington. It's going to be funded by the interest off what they called the school fund. Somewhere between then and now, that whole concept has disappeared, but certainly it wasn't meant to be put on the backs of the municipalities. But as we all know, education for the most part is paid for by taxpayers of the municipalities. The ECS grant was one way. There could be some compensation for the cost of that. The fact that it's not fully funded is something that should be corrected. The towns, certainly within the 5th District, pay hundreds of millions of dollars to the state of Connecticut in the form of income taxes and sales taxes, and we get very low return on that investment. So the pilot money is certainly another source that we need additional compensation for, because what happens is it goes into your mill rate. You're going to be paying more taxes. And fortunately in Farmington we have a low tax rate, so it's more affordable than in West Hartford, but certainly those two pilot grants and ECS grants should be fully funded to every municipality in compensation for not having the, quote, free public education.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fresh.
Yes, as I said before, I've been an educator for 22 years, which is my entire adult life. So obviously this is of tremendous import to me. Mr. Wadsworth mentioned Farmington. Yes, absolutely. That's why I moved to Farmington in 2006, was for the quality of schools. So continuing these ECS grants is imperative, but the fact that they aren't funded is, well, it's kind of ridiculous, really, if you think about it. It's no different than the state pension fund. And it's just a result of fiscal irresponsibility as far as I'm concerned. I think in order to remedy that, like Mr. Greenstein said before, cutting spending is in order, not raising taxes. Our governor-elect said that he wasn't going to increase taxes, and that appears to no longer be the case. But education has got to trump, pardon the pun, everything else. So we have to make sure that those grants are funded, not just for Farmington or West Hartford, not even just for Bloomfield and Burlington, but for every town and municipality in the state. I think that's of the utmost importance, without a doubt.
Thank you. Mr. Greenstein.
Here's dopey government at work again. ECS not only gets refunded unfunded waivers, they can't even agree to something for more than 2 straight years. West Hartford, I will wager, will never get an ECS grant increased. If you are able to make that actually happen, well, then I'd like you to be a Democrat leader in the House.
Thank you. And Mr. Slapp. No, I already had you, right? Sorry. So we're on to a new question, and this goes to Mr. Wadsworth. What are your thoughts on the 50% ammunitions tax and the ramification on women and lower income families from being able to afford to arm and protect themselves?
The Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States gives citizens the right to bear arms. There's some cagey wording in there about militia. The Constitution of the State of Connecticut, however, is much clearer about citizens' right to bear arms for their own protection and for the protection of the state. So they're almost called on as a militia force at some point in time if it becomes that extreme. The tax on ammunition is a penalty tax in my view. I mean, sales taxes are what they are. They're at 6.35%. There's absolutely no reason why they should be higher for some types of products versus the others.
Thank you. Mr. Presh?
Mr. Wadsworth stole my thunder about the Second Amendment in the Connecticut Constitution, so thank you. You saved me a couple seconds of time there. Yes, I agree. I'm a big proponent of the Second Amendment. I'm not a gun owner. I will say that right now. I'm not saying I won't be one day, but I'm not now, and I haven't been in my entire life. So I really don't have a horse in this race, per se. I do think that proposing a 50% sales tax on ammunition is a violation of the Second Amendment of our U.S. Constitution and a violation of the Connecticut State Constitution. I think gun violence is obviously a huge problem in this country. However, I think you could easily take out the word gun and just say violence is a problem in this country. I think it's deplorable that some of our senators in Washington, D.C. right now, I won't mention any names, but are sensationalizing the tragedies, like things that happened obviously down in Newtown with Sandy Hook, Parkland in Florida a year ago yesterday. I feel like they're sensationalizing those tragedies in an attempt to further an agenda, and I really think that's horrible. I think that's horrible. The violence problem in this country is societal. Okay, there's the old saying that guns don't kill people, people kill people. You know, when I was 16 and I just got my license, my mother said driving a car is like carrying a loaded weapon. Well, I don't think we're proposing anything on, well, God forbid we tax gas any more than it already is, but this is a societal problem more so than anything else. But increasing this is unfair, not just to women, not just to minorities, but to everybody. Thank you.
Mr. Greenstein?
We are sitting now in the district where Jillian Gilchrist put forth this legislation, and it's well-meaning. But like a lot of Democrat leaders' proposals, well-meaning Democrats ending up with things that I think go wayward. None of us want to see more violence, but I have to put this starkly. If, God forbid, there was a shooter in here, in this room, taking out people, I think most of us would be relieved that there was some well-armed civilians able to take that shooter down. Please think about that. The right of people is wise to be able to protect themselves, women especially, protect their families, because the police cannot be everywhere, and we wouldn't want them to be. Well-trained people we ride on airplanes with all the time. Those are the marshals. We can have that in our midst and have a peaceful and basically better society.
Thank you. Mr. Slapp?
Yeah, I'm not sure where the 50% number came from. I mean, how it was devised. I'll take a look at it. I do think there are some things that we can do at the state level in the legislature this year to improve public safety, gun safety. Certainly banning ghost guns is one of them, and looking at safe storage is another. This is one of those areas where there are, there's many areas, but one in particular where some real differences between myself and my Republican opponent. Mr. Wadsworth got a passing grade from the NRA. That's a test that I'm going to fail pretty much every time.
Thank you.
May I?
Yes.
The 50% number came from the bill proposed by Jillian Gilchrist, your
Thank you.
colleague.
Thank you. It is now time for us to go to closing statements. There are lots more questions here, a lot of them focused on the financial situation in our state and what might be done with it, but we did address some of that early on as well. You are free to address that in your closing statements if you wish. And you each have 2 minutes, and your timers have reset the timer for 2 minutes each. And we begin, because of the way the lottery was worked, with Mr. Presh.
Now, I won a lottery for once. First of all, if there's anything anybody would like to discuss with me after the debate's over, I welcome that. I'm all for it. Ladies and gentlemen, integrity is a word that gets used an awful lot in political circles. but I think very few people actually understand what it is. It is the quality of being honest, sincere, ethical, and decent. It's not taking public funding money to win an election for a position that you're not going to take. I think what we're in danger of doing here is having people choose party over person. I feel that that's very disingenuous, and I think what I'm asking you people to do here is to vote for a person, not just a party. I believe in integrity. I do my absolute best to live by that every day. I don't always succeed, but I certainly try, and I believe I'm a better person for the effort. If I say something, I mean it, and if I say I'm going to do something, I do it to the best of my God-given ability. That's what I'm asking you to vote for on the 26th, a man of integrity who will always keep your best interest in mind and at heart. I know many of you have probably already made up your minds about whom you'll cast your vote for. Many of you hear Republican and automatically think of a four-letter word, Trump, maybe another four-letter word or two also. Others among you hear Democrat and automatically think Malloy or taxes. That's voting a party, not a person, the lesser of two evils, so to speak. I understand that. It's the only choice we've had in Connecticut for a very long time, but that's not the case anymore. I ask you to vote for a truly independent candidate who will answer to all of you and not a political party. Finally, the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." In Connecticut, our journey may be longer than 1,000 miles, but the first step is to vote for someone who will work on your behalf, not a party platform. I'm a lifelong Connecticut resident. I've worked in this district for my entire adult life, 22 years, and lived here since 2006. I've got the chance to know students and families from the entire district. I feel I have a great knowledge of this district as a whole, and I plan on being a truly independent voice for all the people, including the middle and working classes, of which I'm proudly a member. So on February 26th, I ask you to put people before politics and cast your vote for me, Jeff Presh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Presh.
Thank you.
Hold your applause, please. And next is Mr. Wadsworth.
First of all, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters of Greater Hartford for putting on this event, and I appreciate your effort and energy that went into putting this all together. Back in 1990, we had a budget of about $7 billion in the state of Connecticut that was paid for by 3.5 million people that lived here. Fast forward 30 years, we have a budget roughly $20 billion plus paid for by 3.5 million people that live here. Those are not good numbers. We have not grown our population as we should have. There was mention earlier about our children leaving the state. It's the case for Kate and I. 5 out of our 6 children have left the state of Connecticut after getting a good education here, and that is unacceptable in terms of moving forward. We've lost a congressional seat already, and who knows with the growth in the rest of the country if we'll lose another congressional seat going forward. And this has to do primarily with education, which we know we do a pretty good job at, but we don't do a good job at creating jobs. And that's the businesses that we spoke about earlier, that they don't have an environment here which they can grow jobs and employ our children so they can stay here so we don't have to travel so far to see our grandchildren. So I would support a smaller government, as I guess I was getting at earlier, one that has, focuses on the fundamentals, education, public safety, public health, and transportation, and go start with that, reframe the way we do our government, and move forward on that. So that's my platform. My positions, which I have had for 20 years, is that I'm a fiscal conservative Republican, and don't want to put taxes on people that they don't need to pay. They should spend their disposable income in other ways. So please support me on February 26th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wadsworth. Next is Mr. Slapp.
Thank you. I grew up in a family where my father was a minister and my mother was a nurse. And the expectation was that we would find meaningful ways in our life to give back and to help others. And it has been my profound honor to be a state representative for the last 2 years. And I've devoted myself to doing that, to reaching across the aisle and to helping people. And I want to relay one quick story to you. It's when Scott and Julia Zweig, who live in West Hartford, and they came to the legislature and they asked for help because their daughter has a life-threatening food allergy. And they were terrified to put her on the school bus each day. And if you can imagine, under state law, they could not put an EpiPen with her, so she could not bring the EpiPen on the bus, and the bus driver would not be trained, right? So can you imagine as a parent each day putting your child on a bus and just praying that somebody didn't bring a peanut butter sandwich or whatever, all right, onto the bus, and just hoping that their child got to school safely. And I worked very hard with colleagues, again, on both sides of the aisle, raced all over the House floor, convincing other colleagues to stand up to the bus industry and saying we can reach a compromise and we can do something to help this family. And the feeling when we passed that legislation, I walked out of the chamber, saw the family there, and knew that I and a team of folks, we were able to deliver for that family and help protect their children and all children who have food allergies. That's, to me, what public service is all about. It's lifting other people's voices up. It's working together. It's seeing beyond labels. It's once you get elected, take the D and the R off and have a real dialogue, and don't see people who may be different as other. And that's what I'm committed to, whether it's protecting our water or standing up for our public schools. I'm going to continue to do that if I'm fortunate enough to be elected your state senator. Thank you very much, and I'd be grateful for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Slapp. And Mr. Stewart Greenstein.
Every Democrat in this room shares the same values. We all want better education for our kids. We all want to help poor people. We all want to have single moms thrive. We all want to have African Americans uplifted even more. But our Democrat legislators often thwart that, and I'm referring most stridently to the Josh Elliott wing. Okay? They are strong, they are far left, they are wrong. Martin Looney is in that category. Derek, I don't know if you are, but I think you're going to have to decide, and you should be public with it. They're dangerous because their proposals are going to bankrupt Connecticut. They're going to leave less likelihood of new businesses wanting to come. Minimum wage sounds nice, but it hurts the people who need it the most. The kids, often urban kids, who need a first job, more than an extra $4 or $5 an hour. They need to get on the rung of a ladder towards success, build up responsibility, learn customer service, learn how to be on time for a job. That is so much more important. But legislative proposals, especially the command and control that we hear out of New Haven, again, I'm going to call that the Josh Elliott wing, they are ones that I'm here to fight. I am a Democrat, but I'm your father's Democrat. I'm the old-fashioned Democrat. I voted for Walter Mondale. I voted for Bill Clinton. But Bill Clinton, 1992, could not get elected today by our Democrat leadership. Too moderate. I started a party. It's on the web, amigovote.us. We're here to make better candidates, to pad a candidate who's really good, Democrat or Republican,
Thank
but
you,
to
Mr.
offer something
Greenstein.
else in addition.
And gentlemen, I thank you all on behalf of the League of Women Voters and WHC-TV, and I'd like to speak for all of the people in the district and hope they all come out to vote. You've given us a very good discussion, and I appreciate the time and effort you put into taking the plunge into running for elective office and putting all the energy and time into it that's required. And I want to thank all of the people here who submitted questions, to our timers and to the question screeners for making this a good evening of discussion and getting to know you a little bit. Please remember to vote on Tuesday, February 26th. It's important. This is a fairly good-sized district, and we'd like to see everyone out there share with all your friends that they can watch this on WHCTV.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said, well done. Hey, well done, as I expected.